Most people believe something simple. If they could just become more disciplined, their life would change. They would work harder, stay consistent, finally start doing the difficult things they keep postponing. But there's a problem with that idea. Your brain was not designed to enjoy difficult things. In fact, it was designed to avoid them. Effort costs energy. Uncertainty creates risk. And for most of human history, wasting energy can mean not surviving. So the brain developed a simple strategy. Prefer what is easy, avoid what is difficult. And that creates a strange conflict in modern life, because almost everything that improves your future is difficult in the present. Learning, training, building something from nothing, all of it requires sustained effort. But your brain is still running very old software. Software designed to protect energy, not build ambition. So when you try to do something difficult, something inside you quietly pushes back, not aggressively, just enough to make starting feel heavier than it should. And the strange part is, this resistance doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. The real question is something else. If the brain naturally avoids difficulty, how do some people train themselves to pursue it anyway? Because if you look closely, a strange contradiction appears. You want a better life. You want discipline, consistency, progress. You imagine yourself working with focus, building things, learning difficult skills, becoming someone more capable. But when the moment arrives, something inside you resists. You sit down to start, and suddenly the task feels heavier than it should. Opening the document feels difficult. Starting the workout feels unnecessary. Studying feels strangely exhausting before you even begin. So you delay, just for a moment. You check something quickly. A message, a notification, a video, just a short break before starting. But minutes stretch, and the difficult thing remains untouched. At some point the day ends, and a quiet frustration appears. Not because you don't know what to do, but because you didn't do what you already knew. And this is where most explanations begin to fail. People say you lack discipline. They say you need more motivation. They say successful people simply push through resistance. But something about that explanation never fully fits, because the resistance feels deeper than laziness. It feels automatic, almost mechanical, as if your brain is quietly redirecting you away from difficulty, not aggressively, just subtly, almost invisibly. And if you watch your behavior long enough, a pattern begins to appear. But here's something strange. Your brain doesn't avoid all difficult things. You can spend hours playing a challenging game, solving puzzles, watching complex movies, learning the rules of something complicated. So difficulty itself isn't the real problem. Your brain is perfectly capable of effort, which raises a more uncomfortable question. Why does your brain resist the difficult things that actually improve your life? Your brain is extremely good at choosing what feels easy right now, even when you consciously want something harder that benefits you later, which creates a strange internal tension. Part of you wants growth. Another part wants comfort, and comfort usually wins, not because you are weak, but because your brain believes comfort is safer. And slowly, without realizing it, a loop forms. Avoid something difficult. Feel relief. Do something easy. Feel rewarded. And over time, the brain learns a pattern. Difficulty means discomfort. Comfort means safety. So it starts redirecting you earlier, before the effort even begins, which creates one of the strangest psychological experiences in modern life. You want the result, but you resist the process. You admire discipline, but you avoid practicing it. And the worst part is, most people assume disciplined individuals simply don't feel this resistance. That productive people are wired differently. But that assumption is wrong. The resistance exists in almost everyone. The real difference appears somewhere else. Not in motivation, not in personality, but in how people interact with that resistance. Because most people spend their lives trying to eliminate it, trying to feel motivated, try to make difficult things feel easy. But what if that approach is fundamentally wrong? What if the goal was never to remove resistance, but to understand why it appears in the first place? Because once you understand the mechanism behind that resistance, something interesting becomes possible. Instead of fighting your brain, you can begin training it. But to see how that works, we first need to look at something most people never notice. The hidden psychological forces that make the brain resist effort. And those forces are far more subtle than they first appear. Once you start paying attention to this resistance, something subtle becomes clear. Your brain isn't only avoiding effort, it's protecting you from something else. Feedback. Because difficult things produce information. Information about your ability, your limits, your current level. And the brain treats that information very carefully. As long as you don't fully try, something remains intact. Your potential, untested potential, feels safe. It allows the mind to imagine success without confronting reality. You could be great at it. You might succeed. But the moment you commit real effort, imagination disappears. Reality replaces it. Progress becomes visible. So do mistakes. And the brain interprets that exposure as risk. Not physical risk. Psychological risk. Risk to identity. This is why resistance appears strongest right before meaningful effort. Not when something is easy. Not when the outcome doesn't matter. But when the result could say something real about you. So the brain delays. It postpones the moment where effort becomes evidence. Because once effort becomes visible, so does the truth. But this creates a strange paradox. The brain is trying to protect you from discomfort. Yet by avoiding effort, it never gathers the evidence it needs. Evidence that effort is survivable. Evidence that slow progress is normal. Evidence that mistakes are not identity. Without that evidence, difficulty remains mysterious. And mysterious things always feel threatening, which means the resistance never disappears. It simply waits for the next important task. This is why trying to feel motivated rarely solves the problem. Motivation doesn't change how the brain interprets effort. Evidence does. The brain needs repeated proof that effort is not a threat. And that proof only appears in one place. Not before action, but during it. Which means something interesting happens when effort becomes small enough, safe enough, predictable enough for the brain to experience it without panic. Because in those moments, the brain begins collecting a different kind of evidence. Evidence that difficulty is not danger. Evidence that effort can become familiar. And once that process begins, the relationship with hard things slowly changes. Not through motivation, through exposure. Small exposures that retrain the brain's expectations. And that is where the real shift begins. Because once the brain starts gathering this new evidence, discipline stops being something you force. It becomes something your brain gradually learns. Most people try to force discipline through intensity. They suddenly decide to transform everything. Wake up earlier, work longer, train harder. For a few days, it works. Then the brain reacts. Too much effort, too much change, too quickly. Resistance grows stronger. And eventually the system collapses. The brain returns to what feels familiar, comfort, but the brain doesn't adapt to intensity. It adapts to repetition, small efforts, repeated often enough that the brain begins to recognize them as normal. Imagine someone trying to build a habit of exercise. The usual approach is dramatic. They start with long workouts, 5 days a week, an hour each session. But the brain reads this as a massive demand. Energy cost, high. Uncertainty, high. So resistance appears immediately. Now imagine a different approach. The first week is almost unimpressive. 3 days, one simple exercise each day. Not a full workout, just the act of showing up and doing something physical. Maybe 10 minutes. Enough for the brain to experience effort without panic. The second week changes slightly. 2 exercises instead of 1. Still short, still manageable. But now something important has happened. The brain has collected evidence. Exercise happened. Nothing terrible followed. So resistance decreases slightly. The third week becomes a little longer, maybe 20 minutes. Now the brain is no longer encountering something foreign. It is encountering a pattern, a routine. This is how the nervous system adapts. Gradually, quietly, the same pattern appears in almost every difficult skill. Someone trying to write every day doesn't begin with 3 hours of deep work. That fails quickly. Instead, the first commitment might be small. Open the document, write for 15 minutes. That's it. But the rule is simple. Every day the document opens. Every day words appear. Not perfect words, not impressive words, just visible effort. After a few weeks, something interesting happens. Starting becomes automatic. The brain stops negotiating the beginning. And once the beginning becomes easy, the duration can slowly expand. 15 minutes becomes 30. 30 becomes an hour. Not through force, through familiarity. Because the brain resists the unknown, not effort itself. When effort becomes predictable, resistance shrinks. This is the mechanism most people misunderstand. They think discipline requires heroic willpower. But most disciplined people are simply interacting with effort differently. They shrink the entrance. They make the beginning so small the brain cannot justify resistance. And once the first step happens, momentum carries the rest, because the brain resists starting far more than continuing. This is why many difficult things suddenly feel easier once you begin. The anticipation was worse than the reality. And every time that realization happens, the brain updates its expectations. Difficulty becomes less mysterious, less threatening, more normal. Over time, the identity begins to shift, not through affirmations, through proof. Proof that you are someone who begins things. Proof that effort does not destroy you. Proof that progress is built through repetition, not intensity. And slowly the relationship with difficulty changes. Hard things stop feeling like threats. They start feeling like signals. Signals that you are entering an environment where growth actually happens. Not comfortable, not dramatic, just quietly demanding. And once the brain adapts to that environment, discipline stops looking like force. It starts looking like routine. You sit down and start, not because you feel motivated, but because beginning has become familiar. And familiarity removes fear. You never force your brain to want difficult things. You simply train it to stop avoiding them. And once that happens, most difficult things eventually get done. And this brings us back to the original question. How do you force your brain to do difficult things? Not with motivation, not with pressure, and not by waiting to feel ready. You do it by changing the way your brain experiences effort. First, you shrink the entrance. Instead of planning a massive effort, you make the beginning almost too small to resist. 1 page, 1 exercise, 10 minutes. Something simple enough that the brain cannot justify avoidance. Second, you repeat it consistently, not occasionally, not when you feel inspired, but often enough that the brain begins to recognize a pattern, because repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity reduces resistance. Third, you allow effort to grow slowly. Once starting becomes normal, duration can expand. 10 minutes becomes 20. 1 exercise becomes 3. 1 page becomes a chapter. Not suddenly, gradually. The brain adapts to what it experiences regularly. And this is the real secret. You're not forcing your brain through brute strength. You're training it through evidence. Every small repetition sends the same signal. Effort is survivable. Starting is possible. Progress happens slowly. Over time, the brain updates its expectations. Difficulty stops feeling like danger. It starts feeling normal. And when that shift happens, something interesting appears. Discipline, not as force, but as routine. You sit down and start. Not because you feel motivated, but because beginning has become familiar, and familiarity removes fear. So if this video helped you understand your own resistance a little better, take a second to support the channel, like the video, and subscribe if you want more content like this. And before you leave, think about this. There's probably one difficult thing in your life right now that you keep postponing, not because you can't do it, but because starting feels uncomfortable. So here's a simple experiment. What would happen if you spent just 10 minutes on it today? Not finishing it, not solving everything, just beginning. Because most people wait for the right feeling. But the people who actually change their lives usually do something much simpler. They begin before they feel ready. So the real question isn't whether difficult things are possible for you. The real question is, what will you begin today?